We might be late, but we're worth the wait. It's time for the Nerd Byword to take a closer look at the Blue Beetle film. The Byword starts now. Ladies and gentle nerds, welcome to episode 181 of the Nerd Byword podcast. I'm Dave, I'm here with my buddy Chris, and this week we are going to have us a little deep dive into the world of the Blue Beetle movie, one of the last DC Extended Universe films released. We'll, as always, look at 3 likes and 3 dislikes each before giving the flick a final grade. But before we get to that bug-themed situation, it's time first for... All right, Chris, what's new?
Well, I've been on a run here for the last couple of years of getting back into the WWE. And for my money, this is probably one of the best times to be a fan of professional wrestling. If you are a fan of the more indie circuit or like the throwbacks to like WCW and Nitro, then AEW is right there. Not my personal preference, but it is an option. So there is an alternative option. But right now, what they're doing in the WWE, man, it's cooking. It is right up there with must-see television of the Attitude Era into the early 2000s. So I avoided this news story last week, partly because I wanted to see how it all played out. So you have the American Nightmare, Cody Rhodes, son of Dusty Rhodes, who won the Royal Rumble for the second year in a row. Last year, he won the Royal Rumble and lost to Roman Reigns, who is the big heel, the biggest overarching story with the Samoan bloodline. And now there was an interference by one of the family members, and Cody's thing has been about finishing the story ever since he returned to WWE. He actually left and helped form AEW and then came back to WWE. So it was like this prodigal son returning, finishing the story. And the story is the title that Dusty Rhodes, his father, never won, which is the WWE, previously WWF Championship title. It's gone through a bunch of different name changes, but the title that Roman Reigns holds is something that his father never accomplished. And so that's the be all end all. There are 2 different titles in WWE now. There is the World Heavyweight Championship, which is held by my personal favorite, Seth freaking Rollins. And so once you win the Royal Rumble, you have a choice between the 2. And after winning the Rumble, which your boy was there in person to witness, he specifically pointed at Roman Reigns as he won and said, "I choose you, Roman Reigns." And so everybody was like, all right, book it, let's go. Cut to, as of the time of recording, last week Friday's SmackDown, where Cody says in a promo to Roman Reigns, "I'm coming for everything that you have, just not at WrestleMania. I've been taking counsel from several people, and one of those people knows you very well." And The Rock's music hits, and they end SmackDown just by Roman Reigns and The Rock staring off. And that unleashed an unholy movement on social media, #WeWantCody. Monday's Raw did not do anything to quell those. It was hard for the performers, Cody included, to get through their mic work on promos because of fan chants and Rocky sucks and booing The Rock. And it was a hot mess. Social media was crazy. The Rock's daughter, who's a GM, a front office person on NXT, which is their developmental brand, received death threats and removed her Twitter account. It was absolutely insane. And then the cut to Thursday, where they had Super Bowl week, Las Vegas, a press conference. Millions and millions of people tuned in to a press conference, Dave. There were no matches. It set a record to watch a press conference to see how all of this was going to settle out. And they leaned full into The Rock as a heel And they were doing this whole thing where it was going to be The Rock versus Roman Reigns to see who's the real head of the table, who's the head of this bloodline, like something that you could have written cinema about. And then Cody comes out and says, I choose you, Roman, and everything, chaos ensued. Everybody was insulting families back and forth. The Rock slapped Cody Rhodes, and it's must-see television. So I'm glad I exercised patience, because here we sit. I have no idea what's to come WrestleMania, although it's been confirmed that it will be Cody versus Roman. How does The Rock play into this? He is fully leaning into this heel persona, which, if I don't know if you remember, Dave, that's when The Rock was at his best, was the heel and making fun of people and really digging into people. So I'm hyped, man.
Yeah, as somebody who has been out of the loop of the pro wrestling business for a while, I only have fond memories of The Rock as a wrestler, obviously. So I've been kind of trying to read up on the situation, because when you see a huge backlash online against what used to be one of your favorite pro wrestlers, you're gonna obviously be curious. And I think it's kind of hard telling at this point whether what they're doing right now is in response to the online backlash as a way of salvaging the situation, or whether this was a work to begin with.
Yes.
As a way of getting more more heat on this match, and
Yeah.
more investment from fans in Cody and his title chase here. It's very difficult to tell, which is actually something I've really missed about professional wrestling, when
Yeah.
crap went down and the lines blurred and you're not quite sure what's a work and what's
Yes.
real. So I think that's really it's a fascinating situation, and it's definitely gotten me curious enough to maybe give this whole thing a look. Um, I will say that the backlash against The Rock is probably not unexpected from certain corners of the internet, especially with what went down, supposedly behind the scenes with like the Black Adam situation, and him trying to get, uh, pushing so hard for Black Adam versus Henry Cavill. And there was, I think, a sense that The Rock has gone sort of Hollywood diva a little bit. And so when he showed up in that moment, that there was a backlash is probably really predictable, because it feels like, an old man is coming from Hollywood back just to, take somebody else's spotlight, which is, in fairness, I think, a pretty consistent issue in the world of pro wrestling. And at WWE, it was for a very long time, where it always felt like certain people, no matter how old they got, would constantly be coming back and steal the thunder from young up and comers. That was an underlying issue for many years, even when I was watching it. So I can understand why the initial gut reaction would be, I can't believe this guy's coming from the outside in and is ruining a perfectly good storyline. It's difficult to say right now whether this was a work to begin with, whether they're swerving to and course correcting. Either way, it sounds like it's making for really good pro wrestling entertainment, which is the kind of stuff that I've not seen in a while. Every time I've tuned in, I've kind of struggled to get back into things. So I'm curious.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who say, "Oh, this is a pivot. Oh, they're caving to fans. Oh, they're giving fans what they want." I don't know. And you know what? At the end of the day, who cares if it's a pivot? Who cares if it was a work the whole time? I think I think it's a work. Just my gut reaction, but at the same time, I could be wrong. Like, who cares? At the end of the day, it's must see television. Um, and some of the best stuff is kayfabe, like
Yeah,
the fake stuff
absolutely.
is when those lines are blurred, and when they can lean into it, man, because some of that stuff, it really is just palpable. You can feel the tension, and it's different watching pro wrestling now in the age of social media. And I don't know if you know, Dave, but like there are several blog sites and podcasts that claim to be those quote unquote insiders, the same type of people that break exclusives for the MCU and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you have people who are forecasting 400 different predictions because, oh, they have in the know sources in the industry. And I love just seeing kind of those people exposed for being the frauds that they are. Um, So that's an interesting kind of change in things, because people claim that they know what's happening when they're like the rest of us. They have no idea. But like I said, nonetheless, if you've got a Peacock subscription, you can watch all of these premium live events at no additional cost. And that was really the kicker that kind of brought me back in. And now this Netflix deal, and let's keep it 100 here. All of this, I think, is kind of a ploy to get the headlines off of Vince McMahon and the god awful things that have come to light about him, which you knew as a kid growing up he was an awful individual, but these details, man, are incredibly shocking.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, somebody made an interesting supposition, is that evil Mr. McMahon heel character, now that The Rock is on the board of directors of TKO, the parent company to WWE that they just sold to, maybe they're trying to recapture that authority figure gone heel that meddles and stuff like that. So maybe that's something we're going for. But nonetheless, like I said, must see television.
It's interesting to me. We're talking about like, is it work? Is it real? Blah blah blah. And one of the things that I always appreciated about wrestling back in the day, and that's fading more and more, I think, is that it was this heightened reality that kind of blurred the lines, and you're never quite sure, right? Like people who, especially old school wrestlers, were so serious about not breaking character and being very, like it blew my mind, for example, looking at a clip online the other day, seeing that Triple H is now coming out and the little title card for his name says Paul Triple H Levesque. Like, no, you're Hunter Hearst Helmsley. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? You're breaking character.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's really it's really a different age for pro wrestling in a lot of ways, I think. So the fact that they have something going right now that kind of blurs those lines again, I think is really interesting.
All right, Dave, something that we were worried about several months back. Listen, nobody can be the heel that David Zaslav is right now.
You're not kidding, man. So here we are again talking about Coyote versus Acme, a movie that is a live action and animation hybrid movie that was produced under the previous Warner Brothers regime and is complete and has been sitting on a shelf for a while. Warner Brothers Discovery had actually talked about that they wanted to shelve the movie permanently and take a tax write-off like they did with Batgirl, right? Only Batgirl was like 80% done or something. Like, it wasn't complete yet. This sucker is just finished, right? And in addition, this apparently, everybody who's seen this movie for some screenings has been really, really positive about it. Like, apparently this is a good little movie, according to everybody who's seen it. And so there was a backlash sort of against Warner about this online, and they decided that they're going to reconsider their stance and said that they would allow the filmmakers to try to shop the film around. And that was the last thing we heard for a while. And so there was big hope, I think, of the people behind and in front of the camera and the fans as well of Looney Tunes characters that will actually see this movie see the light of the day. And now it's starting to look increasingly like it's not going to happen, because Warner Brothers Discovery has sort of stacked the deck against people trying to make sure that there is some kind of deal to release this movie. According to the Wrap, Amazon, Netflix, and Paramount all were interested in securing the rights to Coyote versus Acme and putting it on their streaming services. I think Paramount, their proposal reportedly even included a theatrical release as well, which would be like an ideal situation, you would think, for Warner Brothers Discovery. However, according to the Wrap, every one of those offers was not high enough for Warner Brothers Discovery. In fact, as a negotiating tactic, I think this is extremely poor. Warner is apparently looking for $75 to $80 million as a price tag on this film, and they are not willing to entertain any counter offers. So there's zero negotiation. It's very take it leave it. And although this movie obviously has a lot of positive word of mouth, and people who've seen it are generally fans of it, that is a pretty steep price tag. And so Warner's basically saying, well, nobody's willing to meet our demands. So it looks like, unless there's some kind of 11th hour reprieve here, that the movie will, in fact, just like Batgirl, be deleted, and a tax write-off will be their source of income, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me, Chris. What do you think of the situation?
The fact that obviously that's an astronomical price tag to sell that off. So for me, that seems intentional. This is like setting the house on fire for the insurance money, except everybody's in on it and everybody knows about it. And what are you going to do about it? They are looking straight into the camera and saying, this is what we're going to do. We are bringing our evil acts into the light, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Because, like, one of the news stories I was going to go with is this Ryan Coogler, Michael B. Jordan vampire film that I'm very excited about. But guess who acquired the rights? Warner Brothers. Why do I want to get my hopes up and get excited for something that very well may suffer the same fate? Like, this is one of the most iconic brands in Hollywood. And the way that it has been tarnished in super speed form is mind-blowing to me. I'm kind of have like whiplash about how far they have fallen, and in the name of greed. And like, I know that we all like malign like the big evil corporate overlords and capitalism, but like, you'd be hard pressed to find something that was this blatantly obvious.
Yeah, I mean, it's so for a company whose whole bread and butter is to create art. They are the most anti-art company I think I've ever seen. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me. I not to be overly dramatic here or something, but imagine Leonardo da Vinci paints the Mona Lisa and then says, "I'll take 75 or 80 million dollars for it, and if nobody pays me, then I'm gonna burn it out back."
Yes.
Like, it's just mind-blowing to me. Like, this is where we're at this point with Warner Discovery, and I think. And I think, in a way, as a huge DC Comics fan, this scares the crap out of me, Chris. Like, number one, what's going to happen to these DC movies, right? I mean, are they going to like pull the plug on these, or cancel them, or try to delete them because they're not meeting their expectations? And what happens? What happens to my Superbad Legacy movie? I have such high hopes for this thing. But also, you want top people and really talented people involved in these new DC movies, directors and with a vision, and actors and people that want their stuff released and don't want to spend, a year or two of their lives working on a movie that's never going to be seen. And those people are going to start thinking twice whether they even want to work with Warner Discovery. And so now you're shrinking the talent pool of people who are willing to even work on these DC movies. I'm very, very concerned about this kind of mismanagement, and what it'll do to those products.
Listen, and I'm going to color outside the lines here a little bit, and I don't want to be overreactionary or what have you, but Bob Iger's comments this past week about the state of the MCU, and that they're scaling back and they're only featuring like iconic brands or whatever. I'm paraphrasing, but whatever. So that like, the sun's not exactly shining at Disney either when it comes. So we may be at a point where superhero films indeed do take a downturn and become rarer. And that could be disheartening.
Those comments in particular concern me, Chris, because it means that now they're becoming increasingly risk averse. The MCU exists because they took a risk on an Iron Man movie when the general public didn't give diddly squat about Iron Man, right?
Dave, we get the bleep button. We had a fucking raccoon and tree that were talking.
we're not going to see that kind of risk again. Is what I'm concerned about, Chris.
Yeah.
If we're only focusing on the big brands, then a Guardians of the Galaxy is not going to happen again in the MCU because they're not willing to take that kind of risk to do something completely different, new, and off the wall. Everybody in the lead up to Guardians said this movie is ridiculous. There's no way this is going to hit big, and it was fantastic. I love Guardians, so that kind of risk averseness is going to be very, very bad, not just for the industry, but I think for the niche of comic book movies in particular. It's going to be very bad. We're going to see a huge downturn in seeing interesting, off the wall. Like it's going to make it even more samey. We've been talking about already the fact
Yeah.
that the MCU is tonally too similar from movie to movie. That they need to diversify, and now they're saying no, we're doubling down. That's a bad move for long term brand growth, man. It's just a bad move.
Yeah. And I think it's the old guard. Like Bob Iger and David Zaslav, that is not the places where you go for innovation and for evolution and to grow and evolve. Like we need a changing of the guard desperately. We need younger people in these positions, people who care about art. Like, and it's not exclusive to superhero films or series. Like, this is a widespread thing. Like, we've talked till we're blue in the face about television series like that can't make it past a season or two, that have a collective of fans.
Yeah, this is a mess, man. On that depressing note, let's go ahead and take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to start diving into the 2023 flick, The Blue Beetle. So stick around. All right, ladies and gentle people, we are back, and we're going to be talking about the 2023 action sci-fi film Blue Beetle, based on the comic book of the same name from DC Comics, currently streaming on HBO Max. No, wait, I'm sorry, it's just Max these days. Who can keep up with all these constant name changes? So we're going to just go ahead and dive right into this thing. Both Chris and I have selected 3 things we liked about the movie and 3 we disliked about the movie. Quick tagline for the movie: Jaime Reyes suddenly finds himself in possession of an ancient relic of an alien biotechnology called the Scarab. When the Scarab chooses Jaime to be its symbiotic host, he's bestowed with an incredible suit of armor that's capable of extraordinary and unpredictable powers, forever changing his destiny as he becomes the superhero Blue Beetle. Let's dive in, Chris. What's the first thing you liked about the Blue Beetle?
Well, first and foremost, talk about a movie that probably will not see the light of day if these trends, like we talked about, continue. Pleasantly surprised that this was actually allowed to release. I know that it did not perform well at the box office, and that is incredibly sad, but that's neither here nor there. What I loved about this movie, first and foremost, and overall, the thing I enjoyed the most about it was the family. I mean, like, we are simple to please, Dave, and the elements of family and that being the source of your strength. The Scarab is all well and good, and that can give you a great little power set, but your motivation and the most important thing that drives you to be a superhero in stories like this is your family and those close to you. And I think this is right up there with Shazam, right up there with Ms. Marvel, as completely nailing the family dynamics, and how it can be a source of strength, of motivation, and inspiration for these characters.
Yeah, see, I like the family theme too, and you and I have talked about this a lot. I think I think in this movie, although I really like the overall family theme, I don't think they pushed some of the family characters far enough to be really distinctive. Like when you look at something, for example, like a Miss Marvel, right? Like her parents are are like characters that are so clear and well defined that you can about sit there and just want to have dinner with them, you know. And although I think Blue Beetle did a really good job with the dad in particular, he has some nice moments with Jaime when they're talking about like picking themselves up and then still trying, and they're going to figure it out and all that. Those were some really nice moments. But I felt like the mom got really the shaft in this a little
The
bit.
mom was absolutely shafted. Absolutely.
And I remember very vividly, reading especially that first run Blue Beetle Jaime Reyes comic book, that the mom was much more distinctive as a character. So she got kind of flattened out here a little bit, which I thought was a poor choice. Um, and I think part of that might have been um, a function of expanding the family, with George Lopez's crazy uncle character. That there was just not enough time to go around. But I probably would have preferred seeing a little bit more character, I guess, from the mother here. But other than that, I agree. I think family as a superhero background theme is always a really good idea. It always rings even today, because I guess it's been so many years that they've been running this trope. But even today, it still feels kind of fresh when the family actually knows that a family member is a superhero, and we're not playing the old, secret identity trope into the ground. Those kinds of things have their place in superhero comics, but it's refreshing when they don't do it. So yeah, I agree with you.
That's like my favorite thing, I think, about a crossover, a DC Marvel crossover that I would do anything for. You can shut up and take my money. That's what I love about Miles Morales and Jaime Reyes. And if we ever got a crossover, oh man, I I absolutely love that. But yeah, I totally agree with the mom. She got the short end of the stick because even grandma, Abuelita, like got this cool kind of, she was a revolutionary, a freedom fighter kind of backstory a little bit. And it didn't take an overly long amount of time. The sister got some nice screen time, but in a movie that was already a tick over 2 hours, I think we could have carved out a little bit more for mom.
I agree. Yeah.
Dave, I really love this aspect as well.
Yeah, so interesting. I'm gonna go get to this topic in a roundabout way. But what was the city's name? Palmeria, Palm, something like that. I was kind of, when I started watching the movie, it rang a bell, but I was like, I don't understand what's going on here. Jaime is El Paso, Texas. What?
Palmera City. This is
Yeah,
it's
what?
very clearly a Miami kind of vibe.
Yes, yes. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, why does this ring a bell? And why did they make this choice? And so the more I watch the movie and I get like the production design, the vibe, and what they're going for, and Jaime's age, which the first one he was basically a teenager, and I was like, wait a minute, I read a comic book kind of like this, and lo and behold, corporate synergy. Right around the time that this movie was getting ready to come out, DC Comics released a Blue Beetle miniseries when Blue Beetle hadn't had a solo for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and lo and behold, it takes place in this Palmyra city, and it has the same kind of design, like very neon soaked kind of stuff. It takes place at Ted Court. Ted Court has a sister suddenly. Like this kind of stuff was corporate synergy to a T. So the character kind of took a direction in the comic books that aped what they were doing in the movie. And I hadn't seen the movie yet, and I was reading the comic book, and it's like, what are they doing? And then I watched the movie, and I'm like, oh, that's what they're doing. They're trying to imitate the movie. Like, usually you don't see such blatant corporate synergy in comic books anymore. You see a little bit. Um, but this was really in your face. Now, there are good things and bad things about the changes that the movie made, and then the comic book tried to pick up on, and we can get into that. But the one thing I really did like is, if you're going to have another one of these fictional DC cities introduced, it's good to make them distinctive, right? And this one was really distinctive. I really liked that neon soaked production design, that like half a step away from Tron kind of thing almost.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really liked that. I thought it gave it a very unique vibe among superhero movies, which is something that superhero movies really need to work on, is kind of finding their own visual identity a little bit more. So it's, as we said in the news segment, so it's not also flat and samey, right? And I think they did a really good job with it here. I really, really overall like the production design here.
Yeah, I think one of the potential drawbacks of this, and it did get lost a little bit of moving it from El Paso, is because Jaime's family is distinctly Mexican American immigrants. And when you move it to a facsimile of Miami, you get, Cuban vibes. And
Yes.
so I think one of the drawbacks of that is you have playing to the trope that Latinos and Latino culture is monolithic, and that can be problematic. You even have the lead Jenny Cord, played by I believe a Brazilian actress, and so I while I appreciate like this was a very Latino movie, I think that shift can play to some of the tropes, and some of that I would have liked them to play up to their specific heritage a little bit more to kind of make it stand out. Maybe they moved from El Paso to Palmera City so Jaime could go to college. I would have liked a little bit more playing to those distinct nationalities.
Yeah, I'll totally agree with that. Plus, I think, um, we don't always need the skyscraper cityscape stuff,
Yep.
like the way things worked in the comic book for Blue Beetle, I thought was a really cool look. There was a lot of stuff where they were like out in sort of a deserty area too, and that would be a
And I think that
unique
can
look
play
for.
to the blue collar working class kind of message Dad was giving.
Yes, yes, that that they're not, surrounded by, skyscrapers and wealth, Yeah, I like the setting, I think, in the comic book a little better from a thematic standpoint. But I think visually they did something really interesting with the movie, so at least I can't fault it in that regard.
It's almost Tron like
Yeah, yeah.
like a light version, like a demo version of Tron.
Yeah, I just it's kind of like Dayglow 80s or something like
Hmm.
it almost could have had like a period piece vibe to it in some places.
Yeah.
I kind of liked it. I thought it looked really cool. All right, Chris, so what was your second like of the movie?
Well, continuing with that, and I know I don't want to talk out of two sides of my mouth, but like one of the things that I kind of appreciated was like the poignant message about like gentrification and the underappreciation of diverse groups of people in the neighborhood and kind of pushing out and things of that nature. And so if you do go for like that working class aesthetic, it did make sense in that regard that this new tech company is pushing out the blue collar people and kind of crapping on them. And so I think that was a really poignant and important message that working class immigrant families are being lost in the shuffle. And that's not something that is just Hollywood or thematic. That's a real life thing that is a really important message to get across in a movie like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we talked about this a little bit with the Miss Marvel thing. Um, but when you start bringing in different perspectives and different socioeconomic backgrounds and different cultural backgrounds, you add a color to your superhero story that sets it apart from the others and gives it a more unique outlook. And that in itself, in a market that people are already starting to claim is oversaturated, I think is super super important. So what they did with that message here, I think, worked really well overall.
All right, Dave, your next like for Blue Beetle.
Well, I can't pronounce a name from another culture to save my life without embarrassing myself horribly. So I'm just going to say that the Jaime Reyes casting here is actually really, really good. I think the actor in question did a fantastic job with the character, um, and I think hit really a sweet spot of the comic book Jaime, which is a little younger, and therefore plays a little younger. I mean, he's in the movie a recent college graduate, right? And in the comic book, he's a high school kid. So there is room there for artistic interpretation in the acting, and I think that this was just a real good sweet spot for the character. Like I could recognize Jaime from the comic books. In the performance, but also something a little different, which to a certain extent I think can be explained by the age. So I thought the performance here was really really strong.
we're going to continue with the theme of professional wrestling. Tag me in, Dave. I got you. Sholo.
Can I? I was gonna say, can I say at least? I'm pretty sure that the name starts with a sh sound. I seem to have learned at least.
I got much. It. Look at the doc right there. Sholo.
Sholo.
Yeah. Sholo Maridueña. Yeah, I think, and I'm combining my third like in here because we have very similar mindset with this. So I think Sholo Maridueña is like a perfect kind of person to build this around. If you can believe these insider reports, or I think James Gunn may have even confirmed this, but they plan to work with him moving forward in this new universe. And I think that is like easy money. Like that's one of the smartest things. I'm not a Karate Kid nostalgic whatever, so I've not seen Cobra Kai. I've only seen the first one, and that was like 2 years ago. Like that movie, that whole thing passed me by. But I think he has the charisma, he's got the look, he's got the gravitas to be like a leading character moving forward, and I'm really excited to see him work with other characters of the DC universe moving forward. And I think this is a home run if they do indeed keep working with him in the future.
I think if anybody from the previous DC extended universe should stick around and have a legitimate shot in this rebooted DC movie universe, it's definitely him. I think there's charisma there, there's great comedic timing there, there's a lot of heart there. I think the performance, like I said, was really, really good for the character. So I'm all in on that. And talking about Karate Kid, let me just say, okay, that whole thing did not pass me up because I am, after all, a man of a certain age. But Karate Kid Part 2 is my ride or die movie, man. Like, Karate Kid Part 2 is like everything to me. Like, that movie is I'm down and I need to watch a movie to pick me up. That's the movie I watch. And I think you would probably have a bit of appreciation for it too, because rather than doing the whole, we have to defend, the title in the tournament stuff, they actually do a really cool thing where Miyagi has to go home to deal with family drama, and Daniel goes with him. And so you get to be like right in the thick in Okinawa and everything, and it's really, really cool. Like I vastly prefer it over the other two Karate Kid movies. I think it's really solid.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the third one we don't talk about, right?
The third one we don't talk about, and the fourth one we don't talk about much, and the remake we only sometimes talk about. Like it's a very complicated situation. The first one is a classic of 80s schmaltz, but for me, I think the second one, just from a pure storytelling perspective, is the superior movie. I'm a big fan of the second one.
It's funny how much 5 years can make a difference. In our age gap, because you see Pat Morita and you say Mr. Miyagi. I see Grandpa from Three Ninjas. So like I still have the appreciation, but that's Grandpa. And those movies, oh my God, that was everything. Like it took like what I enjoyed of Home Alone is like the kids fighting back, but then you add ninjas to it, and I was like, all right, buckle up, let's go. So I colored outside the lines here, Dave. So we are left with your final like of this film.
I think one of the biggest problems you run into in adaptations of DC media is that they missed the point on one thing that makes, I think, DC distinctive from Marvel in some respects, and that's legacy. We always talk about how things need to progress and move forward more in comic books, but it does somewhat in DC sometimes. There's a big undercurrent of legacy, of the mantle getting handed off, of sidekicks growing up. Those sorts of things occur quite a bit, actually. And it's one of the things that I do appreciate. It's incredibly slow growth, but there's actually some growth sometimes in DC. And so if you look at the Blue Beetle character, there have been now 3 Blue Beetles overall. The first being Dan Garrett, the second Ted Kord, and then finally Jaime Reyes. Of course, Dan Garrett had the Scarab, but he didn't know what it was, and they retconned in that he basically was able to only access a fraction of its power. Ted never had it. He's more like a Batman character, a rich eccentric guy that wants to help people. Minus the trauma uh, and gravelly voice. And then you have Jaime, who gets full access of the actual Scarab. And so when they announced this movie, my instinct was that they were probably going to go ahead and just run with this is the Blue Beetle, and there were no Blue Beetles before him, because that's what most of these adaptations do. They don't really lean into the idea that anything came before, because I don't know why. I think they just feel like they need to start at the 0 point, and I always thought legacy kind of makes the world feel more lived in, but that's just me. And so the fact that we got to actually see the Blue Beetle's lair, and there's a Ted Kord Blue Beetle costume and a Dan Garrett Blue Beetle costume sitting there, and the Kord name is prominent in the movie, and Dan Garrett gets name dropped. And then we got to even see the bug ship of all things, which is such a weird design, but so distinctive and so closely associated with the Ted Kord character. As a long-term comic book fan, I found that incredibly pleasing that we had a movie that does not avoid the idea of legacy for a change, because a lot of those DC adaptations tend to. So I was a big fan of just leaning into the comic book history of the character and the legacy of the character a little bit. I thought that was very cool.
And I think that might be my greatest frustration with DC movies, and one of the reasons why it's so hamstrung by this start stop nature over the past 20 plus years. Because how did we have 3 Batman films with no Robin? And 4 now, the Batman. How?
Don't even. Like, that is one of the greatest frustrations to me as a fan of the comic books.
That's why I ride for Batman Forever. I will forever go up for that film. Batman and Robin, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need laundry kung fu necessarily, but the fact that they actually tried to pull off Robin, I thought was solid effort for the time. But I think they figured out how to do so many weird things in comic books and pull them off believably. If you can pull off a talking raccoon in a movie, then you can pull off Robin as a sidekick to Batman. And I'm waiting, with bated breath, to get a good adaptation of Robin in live action.
Dave, Marvel did it with Kamala and Carol in just a few years of time. Like, what are we doing?
I just don't know. And the discourse around this online is so ridiculous, like, Batman would never take a kid out there and blah blah blah, and the world is too dark for, like, that's the point. Like, it's so disingenuous to just make this stance against Robin generally, to the point where Zack Snyder was like, even Dick Grayson's dead, like, let's just gloss over that. It's getting kind of silly at this point. Like,
why are we mythologizing Bruce Wayne like he's this ineffable character? That's the one I'm over. Like, he's human. Like, we got to stop making him this deity.
I agree, and I totally think that Robin can work on the big screen. Period. Like, I really believe that. All right, let's get into some dislikes there, Chris. What was a stinker here?
I don't know if it was a stinker, and I've enjoyed Susan Sarandon films before, and she just seems so out of place. And not because she's the only white lady in this movie, but
the token cracker.
Right. And there are some times where she's like, I don't know if it's overacting, but like, she just seems like a miscast here. And no disrespect. I mean, like, she's done so many great things in movies and stuff, but like, I just feel like she's out of place, and I can't quite articulate why.
I think her acting is like she's in a different movie. It's like, because she's so isolated away from, like, the family stuff and that drama and Jaime as a character. There's not a lot of interactions there. She's like in her own movie over here. So every time it cuts to her, it's like it's a whole different movie. You know what I mean? And I don't think, I think that Susan Sarandon's a fantastic actress, but I think she wasn't able to really calibrate her performance tonally to the rest of the movie, because she was not really in those scenes, so she didn't really know what the tone was, I think, in those scenes, if you get what I'm saying. And so yeah, there's definitely a dissonance there in her performance and her presence. I will agree with that, absolutely.
All right, so it's been a hot minute since I read that initial Rogers Giffen run. Dave, you're gonna have to jog my memory here.
So um my big thing as far as dislikes go, the first thing that I noted is that the supporting cast from the original run is kind of missing. um I've found myself really missing them. And I will note three characters in particular here that I thought, left sort of a gap in this story. The first is Paco, his best friend. I thought that he, was um, an interesting connection for Jaime outside of his family that was still felt like family. You know what I mean? Like that tight sort of friendship. Um, I really missed Brenda as well. I thought that Brenda was a really interesting character because of her family connection to like the criminal underworld and stuff, and how she's not really aware of that, and the kind of
Is
conflict
is
that has brought
Jenny
to
is
Jaime.
Jenny a substitute for that then?
I think that Jenny is a substitute for Brenda, and I think Paco as a character was just really an oddball in a lot of his appearances. So I think to a certain extent, actually, the George Lopez character is an attempt to have a Paco like character in there, but something that's more tailored to George Lopez as an actor, I guess. Right. But the thing that bothered me the most, and I think that the thing that would have probably solved the Susan Sarandon thing, is that I think that she's a replacement for La Dama, Brenda's aunt, and that crime lord that Jaime is bumping hits with the whole time. That sort of thing was really missed. I didn't really enjoy everything being tied into Ted Cord, and I'll get into that a little bit. But like now suddenly Ted Cord has a sister. Now suddenly Ted Cord has a daughter. And it's very weird, yeah, especially if you know the comic book Ted Cord. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to picture him, getting married and having kids, just because he's just such a he's a dork, man. Like he's so in his little beetle cave and getting up to no good with Booster Gold. It's
I was
just
just
hard
going
to
to
picture
say,
him.
just from what you've told me, he's too obsessed with Booster Gold to get married.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and then the sister thing, and like it also, I'll get into the Ted Cord of it in a little bit. But I do want to just say that Paco, Brenda, Ladama, I think are the actual superior characters compared to the replacements that were created for this. And I think it was cheap writing to just say, okay, everybody's a cord, that is not part of Jaime's family, because that makes it easier. And I think it didn't need to be easy, right? You can have Cord Industries, right, and you can have Ted Cord vanished, and you can have this crime lord Ladama finding out that there's this weapon there and she wants to use it, and you can still have Jaime gets a hold of this thing while he's applying for an internship at Cord Industries or something, and then now suddenly this crime lady's after her, like it would have worked perfectly fine, and you would still have Brenda there for that familial connection between the main villain and one of the heroes, and it's not all just like, oh, everybody's related, you know what I mean? It's just I just prefer the original characters, I guess, as opposed to the stand-ins for them in this story.
It feels in a way like this is a fast food version of the Blue Beetle and the Jaime Reyes story, where things are getting combined, like it's an oversynthesization of characters and themes, and here's the end product. And overall, like it's an enjoyable thing, but there are things that you're sacrificing by viewing this film, and there are things that are lost.
And you know what I miss the most? I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I know that he's going through a renaissance right now, and he's been reinvented for this new DC universe and everything, and he's back wearing the chrome calzone and all that. But I miss that first run's version of Peacemaker.
Yeah.
He's this old, grumpy former hero that is trying to take Jaime under his wing and teach him a little bit how to take care of himself. I miss that
Now
character.
let's hold out hope that could still possibly happen.
It would be a very different context considering, the interpretation of Peacemaker that we have these days, But yeah, I missed the supporting cast. All right, what was your second dislike of the movie?
I think it was a little cheesy. It was a little corny. And that can be the case sometimes when you're going for that family heavy aspect. There can be a cornball effect. Some of the writing could have been a little bit better. Nothing. This is more of a nitpick than anything. It didn't take me out of the film, but it seemed a little bit cheesy.
Yeah, it was a Gouda kind of film, right?
Yeah.
It was all about that mozzarella. It was it's a cheesy crust, yeah, cheese stuffed. It really depends on personal preference. I don't mind some cheese in my movies occasionally if it's done fairly well. I don't think it was horribly offensive here, but yeah, the movie does have a cheesy streak.
All right, Dave, you've teased at this one, and I'm very excited to get into your second dislike.
Yeah, so I'm a big Ted Kord fan. I like the character. I like his friendship with Booster Gold. And I also like that he's, of that Justice League International era, the bwahahaha era. That's a little more tongue in cheek and a little more lighthearted. I like that for the character. And to a certain extent, I think they try to capture that a little bit with the exchange about Batman. Like he's kind of like Batman. No, Batman's a fascist. Like Blue Beetle had a sense of humor. That's accurate. Yeah, but then there's a lot about this version of Ted that kind of sucks. And I just don't understand why those particular decisions were made. I mean, I know they were desperate to try to figure out a way for Susan Sarandon to be a sister and be relevant and all this. But my understanding always was in the comic books that Ted Kord was very much a self-made man. Unlike Bruce Wayne, who came, is old money, right? Ted Kord is an inventor, right? And he invented a bunch of stuff and built his company from there. But here, he had nothing to do with the company, right? It was his grandfather and his sister that built the company. And then for some reason, when the grandfather died, he left the company to Ted instead of the sister. Why did we need that? Like, I don't quite understand why we needed to take this character that doesn't even really make an in-person appearance and sort of diminish his comic book history like that. Like that's what's really cool about the Blue Beetle. Like the bug ship, for example, he built the bug ship. That's his, ship. That's his invention. He built that thing, A lot of the gadgets that he fought with, he invented himself, He's that kind of guy. And then just the whole he disappeared and he's an absent father and the girl had like, is any superhero allowed to just be a good dad? Like, do they all have to just be crappy parents all the time? Like, it was very much like we want to play with the Ted Kord name, but not with Ted Kord. So we're going to have this sister, which doesn't exist in the comic books until that miniseries that was based basically on the movie, and this daughter that's, as far as I know, still doesn't exist in the comic books. So we can play with the Ted Kord name and pay lip service to that, but we're not actually going to portray Ted Kord the way Ted Kord was. And I thought that was a weird choice to make here. It would have been, again, going back to my previous point, I think it would have been almost better just to say that Ted Kord was the Blue Beetle, he disappeared, and then have the characters external to the company and the Kord family trying to get what's there, a little bit of heist element or something to it in the beginning there or something like that. Because I don't think Ted Kord comes out of this looking particularly good as a character, Chris.
I think it's odd that they completely excluded him from the film. That was one of my dislikes, and I'm just gonna tack it on here. Is like we could have had, and maybe I missed it, but like an end credit scene where he's hinted at, or they find
There is.
him, or there is.
There's a mid credit scene where there's like a voice message coming through in that Beetle headquarters, and it's like something like "I'm still alive" or something like that. I was definitely a tease for a potential sequel, maybe, but yeah, there was not enough there.
I'm not sure why they chose to completely remove him. I think like halfway through the film they could have found him or something. It just felt like you're doing a lot of heavy lifting when he's completely absent from the film. And I think it would have been additive to have him. I don't know, maybe it would have been too much long. It would have added too much runtime to the film or whatever, but it felt really weird.
All right, Chris, so that brings us to your final dislike of the movie.
Listen, as a What We Do in the Shadows fan, I was so happy to see Harvey Guillermo, but then he was completely just abused and misused. And so I just need justice for Harvey Guillen because he's an incredible, incredible actor, and they just murked him, and I'm not happy about it.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair, man. Yeah, I will agree with that point. Absolutely.
All right, Dave, we're leaning into your expertise here again for your final dislike.
Okay, so my expertise, I don't know about that. I'm just a big fan of this whole, comic book franchise. But I remember the first like 25 issues of Jaime Reyes' original run was all about, in a way, him trying to figure out the Scarab, right? And the relationship between him and the Scarab. And, like in the movie, there's times where the Scarab just kind of takes over. And then there are times where Jaime is able to basically talk the Scarab down. And the Scarab is very responsive in the movie to him right away, right? Where he says, "I'm not a killer," and the Scarab is like, "Yeah, yeah, command accepted." And in the comic book, the Scarab was much more aggressive and constantly wanted to use lethal methods. And Jaime had to basically try to wrestle the Scarab constantly for control and to stop it from going too far.
Almost like a Venom type of relationship. That's immediately what made me think of.
And what was really cool to me with all of that is that over the course of those issues, the Scarab basically learned morality from Jaime, right? And so by the end, they're on the same page. At the end of that first like 25 issue story, they're on the same page, and there is a conscious choice because like at the end they get separated, right? And Jaime calls for the Scarab, and the Scarab comes to him again, right? And they make a conscious decision that they're a team now. They're on the same page, and that is probably one of the few moments in my entire life where I read a comic book and like literally threw the comic in the air and cheered out loud. It's such a perfect, climax to the constant struggle of these two characters leading to that moment, right? And I thought if they would have leaned a little bit into an initial hostile relationship between the two, and then we also get more of an exploration of Jaime as a person. I mean, he repeatedly says, "I'm not a killer, I'm not a killer," but there's more to it with that. Like there's very much Jaime teaching the Scarab how to be a moral being, and I think that was sort of missing here, and that's probably one of my favorite things of the whole Blue Beetle thing. Also, nitpick, but I didn't think we needed to understand the Scarab. We didn't understand the Scarab in the comic either. We just got like symbols floating in the air to
Yeah,
basically say
the
it's talking some
hieroglyphics
kind of
or
alien
alien
language.
language. Yeah.
Yes. And then Jaime is the only one that can actually not just hear, but also understand. So we as the reader are left in the dark. So some of their exchanges become very clever and funny because we're getting only like half the conversation, and we have to sort of infer what the Scarab is actually saying. And that leads to some really fun moments too. And I thought that was sort of flattened out here. So the whole relationship between Jaime and the Scarab, I think, was much flatter here and less interesting than it was in the comic book.
Yeah, and I think this is another symptom of the oversimplification for like general audiences. It came across as very Iron Man-y and Jarvis. Like it came across as very like Venom, like I said, or even Spider-Man: Homecoming with like what was it, the instant kill mode or something like that,
Yes,
where
exactly.
it was very almost like a karaoke version of that, and it wasn't distinct enough. And I think while you have Carol G, you have a star, um, in the voice role of that. I think it would have been fun to go the route that you did, the route that you laid out, and I think it would have made for much more. We're already fans of Cholo Maraduena in the role, and I think that would have made him stand out even more.
All right, so grade time, Chris. What kind of grade would you give Blue Beetle?
So I watched this on a flight, and I had some travel delays, and so this was on my way home. I was finally getting to come home, and so I was kind of on a high. I texted you very passionately, but now kind of laying it out like this, my excitement is tempered a little bit, but still, this is a really fun movie. I'm going B plus.
Yeah, I'll give it a solid B. I think it's a very good first effort of trying to adapt that character and that situation to live action. I would have high hopes for a sequel if that was in the cards, although it's kind of hard telling what they're going to do with the character moving forward, given the
This is
whole
still
reset over.
WB.
Yeah, that's where we're at. But I would have high hopes, an introduction of Ted Cord, and then of course they didn't change. That was one of my biggest concerns, is that they would change the Scarab to be like a Ted Cord invention or something rather than being alien. They kept that in place, so a sequel could have brought the Reach in, which I think would have been a real place for that Scarab Jaime relationship to shine, because in the comics the Scarab kind of has to make that decision to turn against its own creators and its own people and stick with Jaime, and that's pretty dramatic stuff. So I think there's a ton of potential for a sequel. It's a solid B movie. It didn't set my world on fire, but I wasn't bored either. It's very good, actually. Alrighty, folks, there you have it. That's it for our Byword Big Talk. What did you think of the Blue Beetle? Find us on social media and let us know. You can find us wherever there is a social media platform, at Nerd Byword, or individually at that Nerd Dave and at that Nerd Chris. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, Nerd Commendation time. All right, ladies and gents, we're back, and it's time for everybody's favorite segment where we recommend some nerdy media to you. It is called Commendations. All right, so I actually have a little bit of experience with this one, and I'm very interested to hear your nerd commendation, Chris. What are you nerd commending this week?
Well, your stress levels are probably up just thinking about this game, but
Yep.
I have been playing my Switch OLED, trying to get my money's worth now that I just bought this, and now the Switch 2 is on the horizon. But I'm a sucker for these digital game sales, and I got the Overcooked game for $4 on the eWeb store, and it's fun to like unwind, but at the same time, it's just incredibly stressful. But once you get the hang of it, you get used to it. So if you've ever played something like Diner Dash, like on the browser or maybe on PC, this will be very much that on steroids. And so you are a little chef, and you're chopping up vegetables, you're chopping up ingredients, you're cooking, and it's a very stringent timer. And but this is just a fun way to unwind. I highly recommend having a second person to help you co-op this, because playing it by yourself can be a tall order, but it's a heck of a lot of fun. And for $3-4 on a digital sale, you can't beat it. I'm looking forward to finishing this one up and go moving on to Overcooked 2 as well.
Yeah, so I've played this game, and regrettably, I had not a very good time with it because I tried to play it with somebody else. And
Oh,
it turns out that I'm a decent team player, but for some reason, it never quite clicked with this game. Like, it was just an unholy, uncoordinated mess, and I got really frustrated trying to play with somebody else, and ultimately kind of slowly backed away from the game. I will say I think it's a lot of fun graphically and gameplay wise. It's a solid game, and if you have somebody who can play it with, that's not going to infuriate you to no end, then that this is definitely a game to play. But beware. If you think you want to throw a controller sometimes when you're playing Mario Kart against somebody, play Overcooked with somebody.
listen, let's hope attorneys were not on the phone. All right, Dave, what's your nerd commendation for this week?
I'm going back to the 90s.
As you are wont to do.
As I want to do. So 94, I think precisely, is when I first got a hold of this book, 94, 95 in German translation. It's called The Nitpicker's Guide for Classic Trekkers, and it was written by Phil Farrand. It's unauthorized. sort of exploration of the classic Star Trek series. And Ferrand has written some for, I think, Next Generation as well. I don't know if you ever got to DS9. I think the fad fizzled out after a few volumes. So
There's
um,
nothing to nitpick about that series, though.
yeah, there's that, right? But I actually will tell you that as a fan of the original Star Trek show, the classic Trekker volume is probably my favorite. I read it front to back several times, and I very recently found in a used bookstore an old hardback edition of the movie of the book, and I just reread it, and yeah, it still holds up. So basically, what it does is it goes through the classic series, including the unaired pilot, The Cage, as well as all the classic movies featuring, Kirk, Spock, Scotty, and all those characters. And for each episode or movie, it gives you a plot synopsis and then goes into the author's ruminations, just general thoughts about the episode, and then the real fun starts. You get plot oversights, things that didn't make sense plot wise in the story. Changed premises, where they talk about how something is inconsistent from one episode to another, where they establish something about Vulcans in one episode and then go in a completely different direction after that. Equipment oddities, where technology is being used in a way that is inconsistent with previous episodes. Continuity and production problems, anything from you can see a production helper or a boom mic in the back to anything like that, mishaps with the special effects. Then also each episode has some trivia associated with it, and then goes into how the credits were put together for that particular episode, because each one had, like in the old show, different stills from different episodes. And so it's like, a companion to an old friend. Like I've watched the original Star Trek show many, many times. And this always kind of makes me revisit it and kind of look at it with fresh eyes and be like, they did kind of mess up here. Oh, that is a really interesting inconsistency that they created here. And here's an alternate version of what this aspect of Vulcan society could have been like before they decided to do it this way. So is it nitpicky? Well, absolutely it is. It's in the title. It's the Nitpicker's Guide, right? But at the same time, it's done with a lot of love too for Star Trek and for the franchise. It's never mean-spirited or disrespectful or anything like that. It's always playful and clever, and most of all, appreciates Star Trek for what it is. And for that, I absolutely nerd commend it. I think you can get a Kindle edition these days, and I think it's actually still in print in paperback, which is quite a feat, all things considered, how long this book has been out. But it's still out there and easily found. So if you've not read it, I highly recommend it.
I bet this was chicken soup for your detail-oriented soul.
Very much so. It's definitely in the sweet spot of my personal psychology.
This is so INTJ coded. Yeah, so I'm definitely gonna have to check this one out because, like, as I've talked about before, like watching old episodes of the original series to help me fall asleep and stuff, like it's deeply embedded in there.
And dude, I just looked. There is a Deep Space Nine one.
Okay.
And I've never read it. And now I really wanna. So I'm gonna have to
That
go
sounds
out
like
there.
a future episode.
I'm gonna have to, yeah. And there's a Kindle edition. I might have to just go ahead and download this sucker and check it out. DS9 Nitpicker's Guide. Holy crap! I'm here for it.
That sounds like an episode.
Alrighty, well, there you have it, folks. That's it for another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. If you like what you just heard, get on your favorite podcasting platform and leave us a rating or review and subscribe so you never miss another episode. Our podcast is available wherever podcasts can be found, and of course, our very own spiffy website, nerdbyword.com, where you should also stop by and read some of our written content, as both Chris and I are leaning heavily into reviewing various nerdy content, not just on here on the podcast, but also in writing these days.
And as always, you can find us on social media across all platforms at Nerd Byword. You can find us individually, That Nerd Dave and That Nerd Chris, on Twix. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Chris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.